Wander in, it's only 4:01, but we have a lot to cover. And so welcome everyone. Thanks for being here and you'll get some updates, but obviously I assume everyone took some time to go through this, but there's a lot of work between now and next meeting. And so I think Elizabeth's going to kick us off on some of that. Oh, you need to read the information? You probably should, just to be safe. Lawyers like that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle Kirby. I'm one of the planners, and I'll be helping facilitate this. Work alongside the chair to facilitate the meeting. Housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. That function for this meeting is disabled, as that's to go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to me. City reserves the right to mute or turn off individual videos to minimize distractions during the meeting. And I'll now turn the meeting back over to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks. Hey, everyone. I am here with my colleague, Abby Smith. Abby is joining us virtually tonight. We're all trying to work out holiday schedules and drafting schedules. So, and I brought Brody along to convince him about the wonderfulness of Max Mater. So we'll be doing the forced tour after the meeting.
Mass it is.
Yeah, as it should be, exactly. So we're going to start in on module 1 this evening and go do an overview of it. Talk about some of the questions we raised, talk about some questions you guys might have, talk about making any changes that we might want to make before it goes public shortly, and then talk about some public outreach materials in support of module 1 that we've been putting together to help people understand what the changes might look like. So let's go ahead and get going when you're ready. No rush.
And to be clear, then the idea would be if you hadn't seen we'd come back together after the public input on July 20th.
Yes.
To push out have more conversation discussions about that after. So this is round 1 of our input, not the final part of our input, even on module 1.
Thank you. That's true. So in a conversation getting ready for this round of meetings with staff and our chairperson, we talked about scheduling wise that it would be good to give the steering committee plenty of time to go through and talk about all the changes. So we've scheduled 2 meetings on module 1, and at the end of the second meeting, we'll talk about where we are and where we want to be. In the background, we'll keep the drafting going, but we want to make sure that everyone in this group and people in the community that want to be involved have enough time with the draft and get us their thoughts and comments. So don't panic. You don't have to get it all out tonight. Tonight, what we'd like to walk away with are comments about whether there's really anything in this version of the draft that should be either changed or noted before it goes out to the public in a couple weeks. So that's our goal for this week. So we do. All right, look at that. If we go a couple slides down. So, okay, so reminding everyone of our project goals, simplifying a set of development procedures, identifying opportunities to meet city goals. So I'm just going to do this on my screen at the same time. Making the land development code more user-friendly. So that's a big piece of what we're up to. And creating more predictable development outcomes. Everyone hear me okay over the fans? I want to make sure. Okay. All right. Next slide. And so we go one more. So here we go. So role of the steering committee. So this is where we're starting out with role of the steering committee. Provide local knowledge and specialized expertise, assist in identifying policy level issues, and assist with technical review of the draft code. So for this evening, we are really at bullet 2, assist in identifying policy level issues. So if we've got anything going on in here that we need to talk about that needs to be different before we share it with the public, that's where we are. We'll come back around to everyone's local knowledge and technical review at our deeper dive meeting that we'll do in July. So next slide. That looks like a Monet. I just want to say that. Next slide. So general code reading instructions, if you have not read it yet, hopefully you'll notice that we've edited into more of a plain language approach, less lawyery. Not that lawyers are bad, but it can be hard to understand sometimes. We've made it clear that the reference to planning director or director also refers to planning staff. So you won't see it say planning director or designee. It's baked in. You may notice that there are places where you see 2 carets in the document, and that's a missing cross-reference. It's because we'll draft more of it later, and whatever gets cross-referenced there hasn't been drafted yet. And always some formatting issues may exist. And we say that because we know that we have readers that get unhappy if the formatting falls apart. And we swear by the end of the document that it will behave, but it is essentially a Word document. And if you work in Word, you know that it can get swirly sometimes. So doing our best. Okay.
We lost Zoom.
That was the disclaimer on the agenda. Full access to view or participate in this meeting cannot be guaranteed due to potential technology. It's living up to it.
Becky email. Yeah.
Still on if you
Yeah,
share?
it's okay.
I think you're still
If you
on.
stop sharing.
I think what is it?
Yeah, 6 minutes. I think you're good.
This module 1 packet that everybody got had articles 2 through 8 and 19. And so you can see in the slide and in your packet that we've set it up. So there are zoning districts, general provisions, and then groupings of zoning districts, residential, mixed and commercial, industrial, special purpose overlay. Article 8 has uses and use standards, and Article 19 has measurements and definitions. You'll see Article 19 with every draft because we add in definitions and measurements as we go. We go to the next slide. And then we have also updated some of the content navigation. So we've added details to the table of contents. There are page headers and footers, all of which tries to make it easier to get through code. Some of the preliminary graphics and tables are included in this draft, and maybe a few flowcharts. Those tend to show up more later. And then we've added cross references when they're applicable. So the table that you're looking at here is a new table that we added that links the zoning districts to the comp plan, future types and densities and intensities. They change across each category. So the future residential density, the future commercial type, and the future industrial intensity. Go to the next slide, and we still. So within the zone district, you guys can tell me to stop if I need to. Okay. The zoning districts. You reduced the overall number of zoning districts through consolidation. Why did we do that? Some of them from the older code didn't get used the way they should have been used. They didn't function the way they should have functioned, and we don't need to clean them, keep them on the book, so we clean them up. We either roll them into another district, and if it's not used at all, we can take it out of the code. And if there's some reason to stop using that district, which I think we've done with IDP, we retire it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We've added common page layout with graphics and dimensional tables. So that, again, this is a lot of user friendliness within the code. And also, if you look at the image on here with the 2 units in the residential low density, part of what we're doing in a code is setting up shared expectations with staff and the development applicant. And so if we're looking at a picture and trying to understand where the front setback is, if the code says the front setback is labeled A, that helps that conversation with the applicant and the staff member, helps in the development review process. So that's part of what we're adding here. So we gathered up density and dimensional standards from a variety of different locations and tried to gather them up in one place. We know that one of the problems with the current code is that there's information sort of dispersed across the code and it can be challenging to find. So we tried to pull it all together. And
Tired
then
of watching porn and jerking all the time.
worked in conversation with staff to figure out what lot standards are important and what lot standards aren't really adding to the overall development outcome that the city wants to see. So we've made some changes in there. Do the next slide. So within the residential districts, we have introduced new minimum lot area standards specific to residential use type. We've combined the building, accessory building unit standards with principal building standards. So kind of pulled everything together in one place and introduced minimum density requirements, which is one of our conversation questions for this evening. So instead of just maximum density, do we want to look at minimum and maximum density in the residential districts? We'll go to the next slide. In the mixed and commercial districts, and I know I'm going to say mixed use, and I apologize, I will correct myself along the way. So within these districts, we converted residential office, the current mixed use, and some commercial districts consolidated into 3, which should say mixed districts. There's a note in your cover memo that says after discussion among the consultant team and with staff, we moved away from mixed use. Because it can conflict with some of the other things going on in the code. So these will be mixed districts. In this round of drafting, we removed the design and procedural requirements from the district specific standards. That doesn't mean they've gone away. There will be design standards in the next draft and procedures will be in the draft after that. It's just that we're trying to group like with like, and the design stuff can live in another section and the procedural stuff can live in another section to the extent that it needs to be carried forward. Next slide. The industrial business park district has been retired. And so what that means is the district stays on the books, it stays on the map, everything in IBP stays conforming, but nobody can use this as a zoning district in the future. You can't rezone to IBP. And so there will be other options that will pick up some of the aspects that the IBP was carrying forward, and that will do them kind of in a more modern way. The reason we retired it was going to be challenging to kind of tease apart what could belong in a commercial district, what could belong in a straight up business park. And so keeping everything in place as is will be fine. And then if people want to rezone out of that, that will be an opportunity they have. The general public institutional GPI and hospital districts have been combined into one civic and institutional district, just to kind of narrow down the number of districts there. They do mostly the same thing. Let's do next slide. A big change is in the plan development overlay district. So as Florence goes to a new lineup of zoning districts and encourages people to work within those base districts because it is more helpful over time. It allows rezoning and change over time. We have recommended an initial change to plan development, increasing the minimum district size from a ½ acre to 5 acres. Broadening the approach to standards that are eligible for modification. So more things can get changed, but it has to be a larger development. And then calling out what sort of public benefits need to be provided to the city in order to allow the use of the planned development district, which is the way it's set up is to allow changes to the base districts. The thing that becomes a problem with plan development over time is that you're locked in to whatever the prevailing development standards were the year the development was approved. And so we find communities that have PDs on the books 20, 30, and 40 years later, and development is really different now than it was 30 years ago. So we want to encourage people to stay in the base zoning districts, or if they decide they need to go PD, we want it to be something that will really be beneficial to the community. So if you look through the draft, you'll see that there are 4 different public benefits. And I know there are other conversations about what's public benefits, and we may change the name of this, but in order to be considered for a plan development going forward, the applicant needs to show that the project will meet some baseline sustainability standards, or will be working with and around historic structures and sites, or will be providing affordable housing, or is even larger, I believe 10 acres, and is providing master plan development in a way that can't be done across the base zone districts. So we can come back and talk about this. It's a different approach, and we want to make sure everyone understands it and is comfortable with it. Let's go to the next slide. So Article 8, the use table, is super colorful right now. So some of the changes that we've made in here, the city right now has 2 use tables, one for residential and one for non-residential. We brought those together into one large table. We did some cleanup and reorganization of use groups and subgroups just to bring the use table up to the way we're doing it now as compared to when the code was put in place. We separated out the accessory uses. One of the things that we see in our practice writing zoning codes is that there are more and more accessory uses that are acceptable in a lot of places right now. And we wanted to make it easier and more clear for the city to be able to see, hey, we're doing, a new library. With the library, we wanted to have a coffee shop. It may actually have a bookstore with it. And so some of those are primary and some of those are accessory. And we wanted to be able to get those approvals done without a lot of confusion about, well, do we need to do something special to do this accessory use? So that's part of our conversation there. And then we have changed up, and you'll see some of the changes across the use table, the use permissions. And when we say use permissions, that's what districts can you use it in and what approval process do you need to use? As we've consolidated districts, we've consolidated uses. On the whole, as we do this drafting, we take the more permissive district standards and the more permissive uses, and that's what we carry forward. Our goal is not at this point to take things away from people. That would be something worthy of a bigger discussion. So the goal is roll it up, make it permissive, make sure that people who were in this district or uses that were in this district previously for 95% of the time stay conforming, and look at other opportunities that can happen within those zone districts. Go to the next slide. So in the use specific standards, we took out a lot of floor space based limitations. If you've ever flipped the code, there is this real obsession with 3,000 square feet of some use can do something. And so there, that I'm sure was put in place to make sure that in some buildings there was a mix of uses, or what should have been an office building wasn't all of a sudden taken over by the cafeteria that was included with it. But we have other ways to measure that, and sometimes those floor space based limitations, particularly in Lawrence's code, can cause problems down the road. We were talking with planning staff about the requirement that you had 50,000 square feet in some strip centers to do whatever development you were doing, but grocery stores could be 60,000 square feet. And so our question was, well, if the grocery store goes away, can you put something else in there? And the answer was probably not. It needs to be a grocery store at 60,000 square feet. And that's just an unreasonable barrier in the code. So we wanted to move away from that, some of the floor space limitations, and think about, the idea that things stay, uses change. And we will, make sure that uses that could be something the neighborhood wants to know about or the community wants to know about are noticed or given hearing, but otherwise just, allowing a more generous movement of uses helps keep businesses open, helps new businesses open, and that's one of the things we want to see. In the use specific standards, we separated the principal and the accessory use standards. So some of this is simply organizational to help people find the information in there. So let's go to the next slide. So that's it. That's the big overview. And before we move into questions for discussion, let me ask, did anyone have problems getting through it? Did anyone have questions about what's going on in the draft? Generally. Is anyone saving it to read over the fourth? Maybe with
A lot there. I know some people have some specific questions, but there's big issues before we get to these.
Let's jump into the bigger picture question, and this is where we're looking for feedback. So the draft proposes both minimum and maximum density requirements for all residential zoning districts to better implement Plan 2040. So in some districts, that minimum density may well be a new requirement. We understand that there is zoning in Lawrence that is supposed to be, R5 or R4, where you're, maybe have a minimum lot size and there are 6,000 or 7,000 square feet. And instead, when the property owner comes in to subdivide, they create much larger lots. And that is, something in the past that we would have said, absolutely your prerogative. And the question we're asking now is, if the city wants to see greater density, do we want to put a minimum density in and say you're zoned to a district that has a much smaller minimum lot size and it would be beneficial to do smaller lots? How do we think that would play out in the community? And if not, what do we think we would do to implement that part of the plan, which is, as your consultants, as we sit here, is the community's voice to us, to our instructions for this rewrite. If we tell someone we're getting to density, where's that going to go?
So I might start out by saying that I definitely support increasing density, and that's what Plan 2040 supports. So I think in theory it makes sense. But as you stated, what increasing density would probably look like is making sure people stick to the minimum lot size in a zone rather than increasing it, I guess, because they want to. I guess it's more of a question for the developers and builders and folks who work in this and see pro formas all the time. Does more units per land area generally pencil out better than fewer units per land area? Or is it extremely site dependent? Because if it's not site dependent, then I would assume that people building these units or structures or anything would probably go with whatever the maximum density is allowed, that the market will hold and that the laws will permit, basically. Is that the case? And if so, do we really need a minimum density? Question for, I guess, you four in the middle, probably.
I think we're setting expectations with zoning. And so I think it helps to say, because, we expect a lot of this to be developers, but it can be individuals who are not necessarily developer, who just sort of say, okay, I on the lottery, I want a grand house. I can buy up this property. And we might say, no, the intention was not to have the bus route run all the way by that. So, I mean, I don't know that it's bad to identify that as an intention.
I guess I should note, I have no problem with the minimum density requirement. I just don't know if it's functionally necessary, but that does seem like an example where it could be the case,
I mean, functionally, the minimum density number, which is like, table 23.2. So you say R1, and it's the density minimum, there's no minimum, but if you go to the R2, there's 4 units to the acre. 4 units to the acre, if you take out streets, is way below what we even, I mean, the connection between the density and the lot sizes that go with it don't match. Very seldom can you get what you're talking about. I mean, you couldn't get 4 units to the acre. You could barely do it in an RS5 district that we have right now. You'd have to be really lucky to be able to do that. So the driving factor is almost always the lot width number. That's going to drive what you're doing. It's going to drive what I'm doing. The density number, nobody comes in and, I mean, everybody wants to get as much as they can. But you know what? I've got a house plan that sells like crazy. Everybody loves it. And it's 48 feet wide. And, 5-yard, side yard setbacks, that means, what zoning category do I need to get a 60-foot wide lot? And that is the driving factor. In multifamily districts, it's the same as true. I've got, a 3-story building, I'm going to put in an elevator, and here's the footprint that I want. How many of these can I get on this piece of ground? And whatever the density is whatever the density is. So, we never spend any time talking about, I need to get this project. Clearly, you make more money if you get more units on there, but that is never the driver.
So what's the product? What does it look like, that 48 foot wide? Is that a ranch house or what?
You get a 24-foot wide garage.
Yeah.
You get 24 feet of a bay window and nice entrance and a little porch on the front. 3 bedrooms on the back, 2 bedrooms on the back, maybe 1 upstairs. And if you get a basement on that piece of property, then you could have a 4-bedroom house in that product.
Okay, so it's house and front loaded garage,
Always a front.
all of that. Okay.
I was gonna say, the reason this has come up in at the city commission is someone says, I want to come in and I want to rezone this and I want to make this an affordable housing unit. So I'm going to rezone it RS3, and everyone says, yay, we like that. And then in theory, someone stands up and say, yeah, it's RS3, but they can come in and build 10 houses there and you won't get what you're asking for. I mean, I think that's where the expectation question came up. Again, I think that's would not happen very often back to back, but it could happen that someone rezones RS3, sells it to another developer who then decides they want to do something else. And I think the question there is, if they want to build an RS10 development, should they have to come in and rezone that? Or could they just build bigger houses without making that change? Right?
Yeah, the RS10 or
Whatever they call it now.
the R1
Yeah.
district.
Oh, when that.
Those are your second level houses, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what else to call them. Right? Those aren't starter homes.
Yeah.
Right. So those are people that are going to be more cautious about property values, maintaining their values, what their neighborhood's going to look like. When you go, the other side of that argument, somebody wants a whole lot of density. They come in, they want RS3 because they know they can get a whole bunch of them in there. The problem with that is, first of all, I don't want to preclude us from doing something new. I don't want to say this is how we've always done it. So we got to, force them to do something different. I'm okay with that. The problem with RS3 is we haven't had a lot of experience in building neighborhoods with house floor plans that fit that model. So nobody really knows. We don't know in the builder market, of what that looks like, because we haven't done that. I was reading, I even read your definitions. So, you have a definition of a zero lot line. And I'm thinking, under what set of circumstances can we do a zero lot line in development under our regular? Because that's how we're going to get our density up. That's another avenue to do that. And You know, I'm anxious to see how that fits into future modules, because I'm not so sure in this module, you can't do it. I mean, you haven't filled in all the holes in
Yeah.
here. So I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, how can we get some really deep, strong density on some, and how do we do that? And I don't have enough information.
I agree with you that you don't have enough information, and I'm listening to you and thinking that you could probably pencil it out in your head, but you don't know where the rest of the code is going to get in your way. And one of the things that we've been talking about is in those cases where we're not seeing something that's getting built in the community that could possibly be built in the community, it would be helpful to the code if we did some site testing and put some graphics and example more than the tables. This is the hardest way to figure it out.
Right.
So if we come out of this meeting this evening, having identified, like, I'd love to see some zero lot line graphics and where the rest of the standards go with that. If there are, 3 or 4 other things on that list, that's stuff that we'll start drafting, we'll workshop with you guys, and then we'll figure out how it goes into the code.
Because my natural knee-jerk reaction is, okay, we're going with a PUD, and of course you just.
That's what I figured when I read it.
And so, that has been our tool of choice. Those things done. And I understand, I'm looking to what we're doing here to where we can do what we need to do through standard zoning, and we're not there yet, so I can't.
Okay. So I've got zero lot line. If you come up with anything else that would benefit from a full illustrated build out and the rest of the standards, we'll get that moving forward.
I was just going to mention that, we've had this RM 32 zoning in our neighborhood, and we've had developers that tried to jump through hoops to get that much density and never could. And that is not helpful in terms of zoning, because people have an expectation. When they purchase property, the bank tells you, oh, yeah, you can have 4 units on this lot. And then you just go, no, you can't make it fit. And that is going to be very dependent on the parking standards as part of that. But, here I know that we had developers that can't do RM 32 in our district. And now we're saying, let's have even more dense development. And so again, I'd like to see, what does that actually look like? How many stories is it? Does it mean you have to have underground parking? I mean,
Parking drives though.
right.
So, question, I'm sorry, and this is completely in the weeds question. Would it be helpful so this is gross density, right? That's our discussion is it's theoretical density. You could switch to net density, which is what you can actually build once you take out everything else. Except you have to calculate your own parking, but we know that what you're going to take out for streets, essentially for infrastructure. That is something that we could do at our July meeting to talk about. But if we're in that place of expectations, if we're telling people or banks or whoever else, your net density is likely 3, not 4. Maybe that is helpful down the road.
Yeah, but it all boils down to in R3 and R2, what's our setbacks? And what's our parking requirement? Because that's what drives everything in the world. So, I don't care about net density or gross density. I mean, the first question we ask somebody is, what's the footprint that you're going to try to build with? And then you figure out what's left when I add the front yard, rear yard, and side yard setbacks. A lot of areas, even in their higher end homes, have 5-yard side yard setbacks. And that's one way. I mean, you take 10 homes take 10 feet out of each lot, you know, you're getting one more lot in there in the same market space for houses.
So, I'm on page 26, but I've learned over the years that not everyone else is on page 26 because they're.
Page 26?
Yeah. So, you know, we started with where we always start, which is the setbacks that are in the current code. But a question that we like to explore is, are there places in Lawrence where we should adjust these down further? Should we shrink setbacks? Or should we, you know, even if we shouldn't adjust them down because of the condition on the ground, are there places where we want to say, you know, we're looking to get more housing in here? And one way that we get to more housing is adjust the dimensional standards for the districts.
One of the things I've talked about now for 40 years has been these setbacks don't fit both the new development and the original town site. So all of a sudden, yeah, we can be, I think, closer to the street in the front yard. There can be some things that change if you have a narrower, longer lot. But the problem with saying, here's the zoning, here are the setbacks, is that it doesn't reflect any of that.
And I would say the flip side of that is the argument that we could never, you know, rebuild Old West Lawrence or rebuild, you know, East Lawrence because we can't have alleys, we can't have, you know, a house that's 5 feet from the, you know, with the garage in the back where you park, you know, off the alley. Our code doesn't really allow us to do that. And so again, this idea of allowing people to build things that we're not currently building, you know, I mean, I do think I'd be interested in how those setbacks look, because again, I could see, I mean, I have, you know, weird dreams of, you know, West Lawrence, you know, other side K10 building something that looks completely different. And maybe it's a bunch of townhomes and, you know, close to the street and, you know, my daughter's in Boston now, so I'm walking around Boston looking at all this stuff. I'm thinking, we can't build that. We can't build that if we wanted to. So.
We would just need permission.
Well, you need a PUD.
Right.
You need a PUD.
Right.
You couldn't build it by right.
Right.
Good, but we could also,
We could design that.
Based on
But we're not going to, of your 4 community benefits, we're not going to meet any.
Yeah. Or if we rezone a bunch of land and then someone wants to come in and build it, then we have to rezone it again to a PUD, you know, to try to accomplish it, then that's more process. So.
Okay. I'm gonna move us on to the next question.
So, but back to the question of net versus.
Yeah.
gross, I think anything that's more realistic is more helpful. I mean,
And
you know, don't tell people that there's going to be 4 units, if they know it's an acre, don't tell them 4 units if we all know that they're only going to get 3.
And when we're having a conversation and we have stuff like percent building coverage and percent impervious, we've really got to drill deep down into that and find how realistic those numbers are, because most of the time they're not. They don't relate to nothing. So why put those in there? I mean, if you have side yard setbacks and front yard setbacks, who cares? I mean, really, it make a difference. You've accommodated for all that kind of stuff. I mean, why add just additional criteria in here that somebody's going to have to worry about whether it fits or not?
Well, I think that's a fair question. So our typical assumption on the pervious impervious surface is that there's stormwater calculation in there. But that's a conversation that we can have with Public Works and ask to, you know, kind of reality check, is this related to the stormwater runoff calculation or not? And if it's not, are there adjustments that we can make in that requirement? So I mean, I think we could be open to, conversations about any and all of the standards. We want to end up with the right standards to get the different development patterns that the city wants to see. And if some of these are barriers to getting that, then we need to dig into it and figure out why. If it's accomplishing something, or if it's just accretion over time. Someone thought, well, they measured that in Topeka or in, Leawood or whatever we're adding it into because it must be a great thing, which sometimes happens. Or, someone thought it was going to be helpful for one case and it all of a sudden grew into something else. So we can go back and take a look at that and figure out what it's actually accomplishing.
I would say back to kind of what Nick said with density. I mean, I think that's, and what you said about the LS3, I mean, the setbacks, I mean, most builders are probably going to want to build with a setback because that's what they think people want, the front yard and the whatever. And so most of the time, even if you had a 5-yard front setback, most of the time they'll build 15, 20, 30 feet off. But if someone wants to do something different, I mean, I don't know that forcing everything 15 yards, I can see a little bit on the sides, obviously 5 is not very much, but I mean, whether or not it's 5 feet or 15 feet from the front, I guess I don't see what that accomplishes for us.
In the front, you need that room for the front.
Unless you have something in the back where you're parking in the back.
Street parking. Or don't have a car.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people in the core neighborhoods who don't. So.
So again, and if you want that, then you don't care what the setback is. You're building the house so you have a place to park your car. You can't block the sidewalk,
Well, and I think some of the difference in that is new development and infill in existing neighborhoods where we might have a street line. And so that is important where the house sits on the lot, because otherwise it's, it looks like bad dental work or something if it's in the wrong place. So maybe, in that situation, what we've done in this draft is say that house that gets infilled in an existing neighborhood as a contextual setback. So it has a relationship setback wise to the structures adjacent to it. So it can't be too far forward, can't be too far back.
But if we're, and to next point, which I think is totally valid. So there's a lot of reluctance to this, and Rebecca's probably gotten into this more than I have, is that, we're looking at building a lot of 1-car garages. And people haven't built those in an awfully long time. And so, if you got 2 cars, which is also more in line with people trying to use public transportation. Fewer cars, you got one in the garage and one in the driveway, and there's your property line. That sets your front line of your whole street.
Quick side note, did the planning commission approve the project out west with the 1-car garages? Roger Johnson's project that went from
They recommended
approval of that. That was, to your point, that was one of the first ones I've seen that has one single car garages, small house.
There's a lot of people watching it to see how well it does, because that's a cost savings. It's more efficient. Does a lot for us being able to increase our density really fast.
And carports. Rebecca's got carports on some trips.
Yeah, with some of our newer, where we use the density bonus, so you got 2 little, 500 square foot footprints on a regular size lot. And then we've just put a little carport on there. So, and that then provides that outdoor shaded area so that you're building outdoor usable space in that small of a footprint, which seems to be, even in Kansas where we have a winter, but we have, 2/3 of the year is pretty nice out. And so you need to have that usable space.
Okay, so it's not for lack of imagination. There are actually lots of ideas floating around out there. It's for the code getting in the way, stuff can go. Okay, we can, so let's do this group. We know we need to know more about this. Are there glaring errors that we want to fix before we let the public dive in on this? Or do we know that we can work through it as we go? I would say it sounds like we can work through it as we go. So what do you think? Yeah.
So I'm looking at the lot width minimum. This is page 25. And It's, you put a minimum of 25 foot. For RS 3, 12, 12D and 15. Why is it that narrow?
Because that's a narrow row house is.
That's what,
That's about the width of a row house. A row house can be from about 15 to 30, depending on where you are in the country. So that's about the
but
density.
this is for duplexes.
You can do that too. I mean, there are shotgun houses that are fully detached, single family homes that are about 20.
I am not saying you can't have a unit that's 25 foot. I'm concerned about having a duplex on a 25 foot wide lot.
Wait, are you reading the?
Maybe I'm not reading it right.
Right.
24, 25?
Yeah.
In Montreal, they have up downs in 60% of the city. They're about that width. So these things definitely
So that's
exist.
telling you how we wrapped up. And it reads really weirdly.
Right, but to me, the duplex at 60 foot is more important than the other two. And I'm just, I mean,
Okay, I see where you are. So you're like at the R3 lot with minimum 25.
Under the bottom.
yeah,
Pages or something.
this is
I'm
25.
reading note
So
28.
this is the middle of the chart essentially.
Uh-huh. So all of a sudden, you're saying you can have a duplex on a 25 foot wide lot as the minimum.
So I think what's gonna happen there is,
So let me ask you a question in line with that while you're thinking of the answer.
Yeah.
Most duplexes, we split in half and sell each half.
yeah,
Okay. So is the 25 foot duplex or half of the duplex?
so that's what I was thinking. It's probably half of a duplex. It's that one side lot or the other side of the lot, but.
But the only thing that has saved part of our neighborhood is not being able to tear down every single family house by the stadium and put up a duplex because you have to have 60 foot. So there's going to be a little pushback from one particular neighborhood on that. I mean, I think infill is different from new construction. It'd be one thing if you're building it like that. But in Lawrence, a duplex can be 4 bedrooms per side. And we're not talking about families in there. We're talking about 8 cars. Right? So it does make a difference to the other neighbors on the street if you add 8 bedrooms on in this case, I don't see why you would have to make it. You could make it 25 foot wide and say there's 8 bedrooms. They're on top of each other.
But again, again, this is something we have to continue to address, because I think Nick is saying something I agree with, and you're saying something at least I can partially agree with, which is, I mean, if someone in a new development wanted to build row houses that has a ground floor, and then someone else owns the second floor on 25 feet, in a brand new lot in West Lawrence, because they want to build, row houses. I've seen a lot of those in Boston, where it was a row house that it could be single family, or it could be 3, it could be a triplex. They both look exactly the same, and it could be sitting on 25 feet. And I know Houston has this setback thing where they've reduced the setback. So Houston, they've built a lot of density in areas where they're allowing that.
But then we go ahead and for RM 24, when you think you should have more townhouses and more things on top of each other, it's got to be 50 foot.
That was one of the very specific technical things I brought up, actually, because the density indicated there is pretty much a row house block in Philly, and 25 feet would be totally fine for that. So but that's a general comment that I had.
But that's a row house, not a row house duplex. Is that right?
You can do either, really. I mean, some people want single family might be 3 stories tall. Some people might want a 3 on top like Boston or Montreal. It's kind of whatever the developer, builder, the owner wants to do. And maybe we're just being more permissive than we used to. And maybe more back to how we used to like build what you want if it makes sense, right? Versus build this exact geometrical standard.
Again, I think there's a difference between infill and tearing down houses. So if we want to be green and sustainable, I think we shouldn't have a plan that would tear down every house in a neighborhood to make it something different.
But on the other hand, we don't want a code that says you can't build row houses in West Lawrence. So I think the question is, and we've talked about this, is how you separate new development and back to this contextual setback. I think you can have contextual, can you do contextual?
We can do contextual everything. And this is the conversation that we've kind of had at a high level. What are the character? What are the character areas? And is that useful and meaningful to us? And so the goal is not to, you know, break the Oriat neighborhood. But then the question becomes, how do we protect the Oriat neighborhood, or how do we allow sensitive development in the neighborhood? And how do we go ahead and allow the other development to take place in other places? And so I think this is too one size fits all right now. I think what you're reading is this is going to let someone come into this neighborhood and make changes that aren't going to fit very well.
At the same time, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have 25-foot row houses, but,
I don't hear you saying that, but they might not go everywhere.
right.
Yeah. And so again, I think that's where it's at. I mean, to me, that's, I mean, one of the other things I've always wanted to do is get the county to build a parking garage and build row houses along South Park. It's the best, you know, we have a parking lot there. Anyway, but it's a neighborhood.
We would have had a
Row
bigger
houses.
parking lot if I
Yeah.
hadn't stopped it.
Exactly. But anyway, you know, I think we do want to have that. So I am concerned about making that not allowed. And I guess one of my overarching things is, I can't say this while Marcy isn't listening because she'll like
Okay, I'm
shoot me
listening.
here. Which is, I think we should allow duplexes more often. If, you know, duplexes more often, it's certainly a new development, but even in older neighborhoods, you know, contextually.
The thing I would say to that is duplex is probably the least interesting form of housing. I would love townhouses. I would love triplexes. I happen to own 2 really pretty fourplexes. Those are much more interesting than a duplex because it,
Are you
Here's what
picturing a
you're-
side by side duplex?
What?
Are you picturing a side by side
Yeah.
duplex?
Probably
And that's, I'm not picturing the side by side.
one on top of the other.
Top and bottom
Yeah.
duplex.
Yeah, oh, I'm, you know, I mean,
Or front deck.
yeah, and again, take an old house in Old West Lawrence and want to, you know, make it a duplex and sell the basement.
So
You can't do that,
Well, and
right? Because it's duplex in a single family. Why are we limiting that? Why aren't we allowing somebody who owns a house to say, I'm going to, this is an empty house, I'm going to remodel it into 2 units, not going to change it, not going to tear it down, not going to, but have 2 units, I can sell both units. That's what I want.
that's
to
what,
allow
and
protection.
that's what we've done in my neighborhood and
Yes, but what you're concerned about is someone tearing down an old house and building a massive side-by-side, 4-bedroom,
right.
you know, monstrosity in between 2 historic homes. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think a lot of people want to
Yeah.
support.
Let's go to, in my deal, page 32, which is the RS3 that you're talking about. Just had it in.
Yeah.
Right, okay. And that graphic is what you're talking about. I mean, it's misleading. And I have one pet peeve on all your graphics for these, if I can.
Sure.
All your setbacks say from the back of the sidewalk to the house. If you look at every single one, that's what the graphics all show. From the back of the sidewalk in is your setback. And that is probably never true. And so
But it's true.
It's to the point.
it's, the property line is never at the back of the sidewalk. And we run into that, my surveyors run into that all the time. People want to build a fence They pull a tape off the back of the sidewalk and they start building a fence and they discover they're 2 feet into the right of way. So then the city's gonna have them tear the fence back out and move it in, and that's what your graphic shows. And so, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do graphics.
Yeah. The other one is, I mean, one of your buildings in this R3 is an 18-plex.
It's an 18 plus because you're assuming each of the balconies.
Each of the balconies is a unit,
Yeah,
right? And the maximum density is 15. So I'm not so sure you can build that building.
I think that's one of the challenges of putting graphics in code.
Yeah.
Right? So, we have applicants come in and say, this is ugly. I actually kind of think that shadowy one is a little on the ugly side, reminds me of the 70s.
But you also don't show RC's duplex as another example. I mean, that's the problem with the R3 zoning district. It covers such a big
Yeah.
variety of
It does.
Yeah.
uses. Yeah. And so this one automatic R3, look at those two buildings. That's what R3 is for. It's for these.
I think that's an excellent point. And one of the conversations we have internally is, do we show graphics that show the maximum of what you can get in that district? Because we want to have a reality check about what the district's supposed to be doing. Do we show the full range of what's going on in the district?
And by the way, you don't have any parking.
What's that?
You don't have any parking in these pictures either.
Well, this could be parking, but this doesn't.
So,
These are all good points. What I'm thinking is.
this would be a picture one of my clients comes in and says, can you do this? And I'm gonna look at it and say, no.
It's in the code.
Just try now.
It's right up on that picture.
So,
Yeah, so, okay.
I thought you had the picture on the wrong zoning category, and then I looked at the one you have for R4, I'm like, holy cow, yeah, that's. So,
But
Well, I would-
at least has the townhouse.
yeah, it looks more like that. So,
That is a good question, but I do think the range is important, like that this goes from this, so that you can see it is not always going to be a duplex, but that we need to show people and hope for more density.
I think so we can put the realistic and the aspirational image.
Yeah. And everything in between.
That. Okay, so.
I mean, I know I've looked before at, form-based codes.
Yeah,
Where they have a couple, pictures of, that's a duplex, you'd never think was a duplex, so that's a fullplex that you wouldn't think's a fullplex. There's some row homes. I mean, I do agree, I kind of would rather see a couple of
Variety.
options like that, even though it's not form-based code that says, oh, let's spark some ideas here about what this could look like aspirationally, rather than,
Yeah.
It's more expensive to
Something.
build,
yeah.
right? It's more expensive to build
yes.
a fourplex that doesn't look like four copies of the same thing.
It's a really cheap way to build it.
Yeah.
90%.
Yes.
Concentrating on the wording, page 36, I'd like to strike the last sentence in the paragraph on purpose. When you say this district can serve as a transition between lower density districts in the downtown or university areas, the downtown and university areas are not going to be as dense as this district. It's not a transition between those two. So just say the purpose is to accommodate residential development near retail employment concentrated uses. And then, but it's not a transition. Is that fair? All right.
That's fair.
So I have a question on. Is the word on page 34, is the word commercial left out of purpose?
I think that actually segues into the next slide, right? Like mixed versus residential districts.
hold on 1 second. The neighborhood transitions slide.
Really transitions. the mixed zoning district versus residential.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not
Okay.
trying to defer the question or anything.
Yeah, that's okay.
Say it.
Yeah, no, so
Maybe overgoing.
the mixed use districts. Yeah, why don't you share? Thank you. Okay, so the intent of mixed zoning districts are to incorporate appropriate scales of residential development in currently commercial areas, and some commercial development and commercial development in residential areas. So how do you guys think this will work in Lawrence?
Maybe after the question.
So back to my question.
Yeah. so-
Is, I saw commercial in several places and that's fine, but I didn't see it in the residential high density.
Yep, that's a straight up residential district.
Okay, so. It seems like you're still gonna need. If you want. To have shopping or some. I mean, you're just gonna. Stick this residential high density without any commercial.
I mean, like versus a podium building where you have commercial on the first floor and then living above, like
Like showing the picture.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Or you have a Starbucks
Or a
side apartment building because they know that there's going to be lots of people. A coffee shop, I will say,
Yeah.
local coffee shop.
To me, it just shouldn't be just. Strictly apartments or.
So
townhomes.
Not with the commercial on the bottom isn't actually something we want to see everywhere in the city. There are lots of cities out there that require it and that space stays open for a long time in the current market.
Yeah.
So we were trying to get to something that is residential top to bottom. And there are other places where you might be closer to commercial or more walkable to other commercial. But the more successful mixed use buildings like that are in places where there are a series of them. And you have a commercial walkable area that you go through. So we weren't thinking that these were necessarily that type of development in that location. But it's, if we think this should be more of a mixed district, then that could be something we talk about.
So I have two things to push back on that. You mentioned that a lot of these podium buildings that have commercial in the bottoms tend to stay empty for a long time. Part of the reason is that they're large commercial spaces and they're often expensive, and in an over retailed country, and often each city is pretty over retailed as well. There's usually a lot of vacancy for a reason because there just isn't enough market demand to get that in there. So if you have a 10 to 20,000 square foot space, that's a very specific kind of tenant who's going to go in there. And there's very few 400 to 1,000 square foot spaces that actually could be filled by an average small business. Like it's going to have to be a chain. It's going to have to be a big restaurant. Like for example, Gold Medal Barbecue, that's been 3 things since I've lived here, possibly 4, and I've only been here for 6 years. And it's a humongous space. It probably costs a fortune. So like you're kind of set up to fail unless you were already a beloved restaurant. And even Port Fonda wasn't already beloved enough to make it work. So I would say just because we don't currently see commercial in the first floor of large residential buildings doesn't mean that we can't. I think it's only because they've been set up to fail, geometrically speaking. I also think that there's a difference between prohibiting commercial uses on ground floors versus not requiring them. There's a difference in places in like Houston, Midtown, for example. They're generally required to have either clear story windows along the sidewalk or some kind of commercial space. And when everything's required, that's going to be too much retail. You just don't need all that stuff. But if you don't prohibit it, that's different. Some developers, they decide, we really don't need this, like Proxy on 23rd. We're starting to realize, we didn't really need all this commercial, honestly. This is kind of unnecessary. So they would like to convert it back to residential, but they can't because it's the wrong kind of zoning district, right? Like that special use permits, the whole thing. So if we allow the flexibility for people to build buildings that can evolve with the cities that we live in, it seems like that may be a more realistic and kind of more traditional approach. And that kind of gets to my biggest overarching comment, and that is R3 to R5 and M1 to M3 sure do overlap quite a bit, and their pictures look almost the exact same also. It almost seems like those could be the same districts, honestly, with very little changes. So I think that's why I get back to prohibition versus non-requirement. And I think if we think it from a non-requirement standpoint, then mixing the M's and the R's of the appropriate densities might make sense and making it a little bit simpler and more permissive than they currently are.
And I came back to, I want to see mixed use everywhere. So, you know, I don't want it to be required. But if somebody wants to put little mom and pop shops that could be rented out for a little coffee shop or other retail, to me, that
And I think to an extent, it actually is. I mean, the way it's written, a lot of commercial uses, commercial-ish, are actually allowed maybe by accessory or by special use permit in some of these more dense residential districts. And when I was kind of comparing the use tables at that, there's really a lot of overlap in these things. And just a little bit more permission on the Rs and more prohibition on the Ms would put them very much in line with each other. And I would say, luckily, there actually are some accessory commercial uses permitted in the very low density residential districts as well, which I think is an improvement of what we currently have.
Right,
So
right.
I think it's turning in the right
This is the only
direction.
one that didn't
Yeah.
have commercial in there.
It is weird.
The accessory uses in our district?
Every district has accessories.
Yeah.
I was thinking so.
Yep.
So again, it's
So
not,
I mean, we could change it up. We absolutely can. I think one of the things we want to think about here is if we go to that first floor commercial permitted, the floor plate on commercial is usually higher to the ceiling than residential is, so that does change construction costs somewhat. Also, we can call it flex space. It can be residential when there's demand. It can be commercial when there's demand. It's my understanding, and I don't know that I've seen any studies, just anecdotal information, but once it becomes residential, it tends to not switch back to commercial. So, you know, it's something we can explore in the code. Our initial thought was that to go in at this density, which is already going to be something that, you know, will seem pretty overwhelming to some people. To also add in cars and commercial is going to be a more intense use. But if it's something that we think the, you know, community would like to see or development that would be successful, we can switch this out and move it to, you know, first floor commercial.
Well,
Presume.
I'd also like to see trees. I
I
mean,
presume.
I don't see.
Trees in their drawings.
Yeah.
How about on-street parking too? I presume part of the problem was just mapping it over from existing zoning districts to something going forward. It's a big part that we need.
So how did we get the HERE project? It was in mixed use, right?
and mixed use with the PD overlay.
But the one,
That's the answer. We're gonna do. I'm gonna
the one, you know, the big kind of overwhelming project in our neighborhood does have a little bit of commercial. It hasn't always been successful, but it makes it a much more accessible building than if it were just residential. I mean, you feel like, oh, you put this in my neighborhood, okay, at least I can walk into something, right? Yeah. I mean, it's,
So from a builder's perspective, when you do a podium building and you put commercial on the first floor, you have a completely different building code that dictates that first floor, which drives the cost up a pretty significant amount for a developer to then entertain putting that building in and taking the risk of trying to fill that commercial space and actually get it to cash flow out, along with like, you know, the fire sprinkler systems. There's a lot of.
but we're not making you do it. Nobody's saying you have to do it.
I know, I'm just saying, so if, what
You have to
I'm
have
hearing.
different copper wire, you have to.
Yeah, and so to have that flexibility, I mean, we're talking from a zoning district here in this meeting, but from a builder's perspective that actually builds the buildings, there's a lot of nuance in commercial versus residential building construction codes. And we have an international building code for commercial buildings and an international residential code. So how do we also think about that flexibility of providing in the zoning code and how that overlaps then with the true constructability of the building and the flexibility that I hear everybody talking about? Because once you move into, you know, the actual building code, what how do you, allow for that in the next step of actually constructing the building? I'm completely for having flexibility and letting the market and the developer and the owner have access to that. But then just from a builder's perspective, how do you actually functionally do that?
Have to say in the code, so I don't hear anyone saying it's mandatory. At least for most structures, but. We could say that ground floor commercial is permitted, but it's gonna need to meet code.
We should.
So I don't think we put much more in here than that, because building code will take care of the commercial space requirements.
Yeah.
But what we want to still do, where many codes take a lot of criticism, is not allowing the residential on the first floor. So it'd be those people get the super high cathedral ceilings that nobody else is getting. If we want to make this optional.
Right.
Isn't there a threshold of units that hits you over from the residential to the commercial version of the IBC? Isn't it like 3 or 4 units depending on the city and they adopted? So like what we're seeing on the page is pretty clearly IBC commercial, right? So like there's probably not a scenario where that 4-story, 18 or so unit building is going to be in the IBC residential, right? So like it's going to be ground floor, but like it'll be built to commercial standards regardless at that density and at that
So
size.
I don't think that building is intended to be a podium building. And I appreciate that that's what you guys see when you look at the image. None of the buildings are intended to be much, but showing generally what your massing can be. And I think that one of the things, just to go way into the weeds, that we're gonna try to do with this code is the ArcGIS now has a product called Arc Urban, and we can put the proposed dimensional standards in and do a mock-up of the buildings. So we're going to try to do that and come back. So these images aren't intended to show specific building construction types. And when I hear you guys saying that, it concerns me that we're in the wrong place with the images. So imagine that they're more boxy. And we'll go back and do some redrawing to get to that place. I appreciate the input. I hadn't had that feedback on these images before, and if that's how they're being read here, that's not how they're supposed to be read. So we need to do something different to make sure that we're not encouraging people to do something that they're not supposed to be doing. So thank you for.
I would just finish. I fully appreciate where the discussion went here with flexibility. I just was kind of thinking at it from a construction standpoint of how that would happen in real life as a project move forward in design. So I think it completely can be accomplished.
How does condoing out these buildings in M1 play a role in this?
So typically in the zoning code, we don't care what your ownership format is. So you can do it any way that you think you can. What we want to try to do is what you pointed out earlier, make sure that we can do a pull apart duplex or townhome or whatever. So that you go into individual ownership.
In commercial and in multifamily, it shouldn't make it. I just thought of it.
Yes, yeah. So you own it however you want to. Yeah.
I have a question about the overlay zoning district. So, was there any thought to an affordable housing overlay district, partly because that's one of our main goals? And I feel like on page 77, where we talk about kind of planned unit development, the affordable, which I've seen that as trying to keep the density bonus available for affordable housing built in the code, which I super appreciate. But that wouldn't, the planned unit development stuff requires 5 acres.
Right.
So it doesn't give us some flexibility for a really affordable project that maybe we don't have just 10%, which is a question, certainly those are proponents of affordable housing have to, and is that enough, right, for the incentives, or are the incentives enough, vice versa? But just thinking that an affordable housing overlay district may be, especially in this interim where we're trying to get more quickly. Not interim, it's in code, but I mean, in this moment that where we need a lot more quickly. And maybe in smaller infill or whatever, that could be put where, yeah, you have 0 lot lines or you have reduced parking, you know, because you're building something that doesn't require all that because it truly is subsidized and affordable.
And so, it's such a good question. So because we're all in this process of shredding the current code, from a drafting perspective, our preference would be just to bake that into the zoning districts themselves rather than do an overlay. So to make it so that you can get to affordable construction in a variety of zoning districts. Sure. One thing that is, I think, interesting about, you know, pursuing as an idea of an affordable housing overlay is it kind of gives fair warning. It's like this area is in the affordable housing overlay. And nobody on the city's end is going to get in the way, or not the public end, which is probably the more challenging part. So I guess I would ask us as a group, so an overlay district, just to back up a second, is we write in these base zoning districts, you can do the duplexes, right? We're back in those districts, but you're in an affordable housing overlay where we say, well, you know, you can do a lot of adjustments or even just a full-on density bonus. So for every affordable unit you give us, you can do another market rate unit. Or we'll let you build, you know, 40% more on the lot, or your height can increase by, you know, a whole story or 2 stories. And that is, I mean, some of that is extreme just to make the example. Sometimes it only takes a little bit of change to help get more affordable housing, not a lot. Sometimes that change is in the use table. When we go from saying this is a single family district to this district allows duplexes and triplexes, which is actually one of our questions down the road here. So would there be a benefit within Lawrence of saying we think that these areas are great locations to put in affordable housing and do an overlay that way? Or or do we do it in the base zoning districts? And we probably as a group need to have a discussion about all the tools that we can use within the code to get to affordable housing.
And can I talk again real quick for a little more context with that I guess I'm speaking from the affordable housing development community where we're really like low income housing tax credits or, I mean, truly like supportive service housing, which is what we need. So I love the base districts allow for much more affordability and mixture of affordability and potentially for-profit developers adding to affordability. Sounds fabulous, but the deeply, deeply subsidized affordable housing, I think could use some other tools.
So I think that's something we maybe want to do some conversation about where that might go across the districts that we're proposing. We probably want to talk about the full range of incentives and adjustments that we would need to do to get there. I know we can't do inclusionary in Kansas, but assume we could do voluntary bonusing. So has anyone put together a list of all of the adjustments they would need to help a deeply affordable project on
We have a good list, but that's a great thing for us to focus on of like looking at some of these projects that have greater density that we've never been able to build before that we're envisioning now. What does that really require?
So maybe we can do some work on that offline and then bring it back to the group and explain why it's beneficial to getting that type of housing. Okay. Okay, where are we? Apart from having a really good discussion. Go ahead.
Before we get off, the mixed and commercial zoning, I'm somehow got stuck on this lot with minimums. And I'm going back and realizing that in a duplex, and we say it's a 25 minimum lot, you take 10 foot off of that. Now we're talking about a 15-foot wide building, not 25.
You do if you need side setbacks. There are some cases where you don't.
Right. But so on IG where it's 50 foot, you have a 50-foot lot width minimum. And then street side is 25 foot or 50 and interior side is 25. So you have nothing left to build on. And in fact, our city commission asked industrial zoning on a lot that ended up with a 5-foot width for development for a project. And then they had to come in and get a variance because you can't do it. So it's not helpful to combine those two things. If we're really talking about these street side and interior side setbacks, you have to have a wider lot. Otherwise you're left with nothing.
So if you
Let's reduce setbacks.
yeah, so in table 20-3-2, under the new RSs, a lot of those the interior side setbacks are 0 or 5 feet. And I don't know what that one goes to. It's not clear, but it depends on the kind of building. So I would bet if you're doing something zero lot line, multi-family dwelling, something like that, you probably should build to the lot. And that sounds to me like more a traditional city development. Like in Baltimore, you might get like a whole street of row houses and they're like 25 things and they all look roughly the same, or DC or Boston or really anything east of Mississippi, where you basically will get, single family homes, be simple, but they are touching each other and they don't have any side setbacks and you can make full use of that 25-foot lot width, which is pretty generous in a lot of East Coast cities, actually.
Yeah, a 25-foot wide house,
Huge
row house is a big old row house, isn't
I lived in
it?
a 15er, it was just fine with 4 people. So,
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the picture that we have in our heads of how this works, been translating out and causing you concerns. And I was actually where Nick was earlier, because I was like 25 feet for a row house is way too wide. That should actually be narrower. So we may need to, in the same way that we've gone in and done the dwelling detached and duplex, dwelling attached and multi-unit, you may break that down further and then do some of the lot widths attached to the unit types instead. So you're not having to do mental math on this. Well, you will at some point, but
right.
up front, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to the mixed use again, because we started down that road with our 5, which we're going to make an optional, it'll be an optional mixed district essentially. So what are you guys thinking when we say, there should be a much easier way to get to more mixed use development, pretty much by right, moving away from some of what is complicated about the MU, the current MU district, the primary, secondary, and tertiary. And just say, in cities, we allow a lot of different things in a lot of different places. Does that sound about right? Yeah.
I think that's what Kay's saying.
Yeah, I don't disagree with them.
Yeah.
Curious to hear where we're going with it though.
Okay, all right, that wasn't hard. We'll see what feedback we get on that. Let's do the PD for a few minutes. So coming off of our conversation about affordable housing, where that 5-acre PD was going to be problematic. Let's do this 2 ways. First off, what do you think about the city specifying this is the benefit that we want to see to allow a PD? So PD is completely optional, which puts the city in a position of saying, we're not giving it to everybody. And just for your bad planning history, it came out of much older zoning codes that were much more rigid in what they could do. And this was, I think in the 40s, an awesome idea for more flexibility. But now we draft more flexibility into the code itself. And so it used to be that you could get a PD if you were doing better design. But we're also drafting better design into the code itself. So now we circle back and we say, okay, we're giving you maximum flexibility and you're giving the community the spend. So it's either more sustainable development, which we measure by car trips or by reduced water use or by reduced electrical demand. Or you're doing something within a historic or cultural area that is working to maintain that preservation while doing more sensitive development around it. So we took our first best guess at what might be meaningful. And this is open to discussion. So, you know, our question to you guys to think about, and it could be for our discussion next month, are these the categories that we like? Are there other priorities that are higher? Some communities pulled out for much more open space or park to trail connections. You know, it could be whatever is important to Lawrence. And that would be, you know, something that we could write into this.
Well, and conceptually, you know, I mean, the positive side of a PD to me has always been, hey, there's something our code did not contemplate. We need to have an option.
Yep.
You know, the negative side as a PD is this developer just doesn't want to follow the code, so he's gonna ask for a PD because and everyone's gonna ask for a PD, and that means the code's bad. You know, I guess I am leery about, you know, thinking we've covered everything and then having a great plan come along and not having a tool to, I mean, I like some of the goals. I mean, I think this is one of the things we found with mixed use, and maybe Jeff or someone could jump in there. We had all these great ideas about mixed use. You did this, you get this bonus, and we did that, you get this bonus, and I don't know, Phil will probably say this too. I think everyone looked at it said, that's too complicated, you know, we're not gonna mess with that. And so I'm a little leery about over incentivizing, you know, again, maybe you do something on the procedural end and say, I mean, I'm making this up, you know, a PD can happen with 4 votes instead of 5 or a super majority. Or something to make it harder, but at least leave the flexibility so we don't create. So I don't want, I mean, personally, I don't want to limit creativity by some constructs.
I do think that there is some limit to creativity by the minimum area required. I think if you're saying only people who have 5 acres worth of space that they can do something cool with are allowed to, well, that doesn't really work out very well for like small neighborhoods. Might get a couple houses together, like, let's do something crazy, you know. I don't even know what that would be, like heretofore unthought of, right? But if you're only saying 5 acres, that kind of privileges the more moneyed and connected developers, right? Whereas half acres, like anybody could just decide to do some weird co-housing thing with no parking, and if that meets the 4 benefits, and have at it, right? Good luck selling it again, but you can do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anybody. I do think that those 4 metrics seem pretty decent. They seem broad enough, and they do seem pretty aligned to Plan 2040. People will definitely have problems with them because that's just the nature of a society, right? Like somebody's going to be like, I don't think that's good. But overall, I think they do broadly match with Plan 2040. So I would agree that they're kind of subjective, but they could be made more quantitative if need be. Just to be above more scrutiny, right?
And I think the opposite, really. I think if you have 5 acres, you've got 10 acres of a piece of ground, your opportunities to meet the standard zoning code are so much greater. Okay, it's the odd shaped, small little pieces that are going to cause somebody to come in and say, man, this just doesn't work. Okay, that's, you know, I think it's the opposite. I think it's the small, really odd shaped pieces are the ones that somebody's going to come in and say, oh man, you know, if you get 5 acres, I mean, you know.
So no minimum.
Becky's gonna tell us, hey, you ought to be able to do a standard zoning.
Yeah, no, we've
Sound like
done
we
that
agree.
in other communities, that small weird lot thing is like, if you've got nothing else, bring us a PD.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, why even have the 4 criteria? Because you're not gonna meet any of them.
I think that would be a different category, actually, because I think you do like a small PD would be, you know, less than half an acre or something like that. A lot that couldn't have been
Yeah.
built otherwise.
But I'd like to see us focus our energies on this, on the standard zonings and get them as rock solid as we can. And then just simply say, man, if you just can't, if you've got a good argument to come in and want to do a PD, you know, maybe put one additional hurdle in there that you're gonna disincentivize somebody from wanting to do that. But now let's just not take that completely off the table and make it the most odd set of circumstances that you can ever, because you're just disincentivizing somebody from doing something. And there's just, it's, in my mind, it's just punitive. And there's no reason to do that if we can't do a good enough job on our standard zoning care. Because I mean, we would really rather come in, with standard zoning categories, because it's so much easier.
If you can rezone and not have to jump through all the PD stuff.
And that all by itself is enough incentive.
I kind of see the PD though as maybe not being for commercial developers and engineers and builders, but people like, so full disclosure, I live in Delaware's 3 Commons, which is a co-housing community, and it was started by just a bunch of people who were just kind of quasi hippie and were like, let's live together, man. And it's not nearly as hippie as I thought it was going to be, but it's just a bunch of people. None of them are developers. I think one was maybe an architect. This is years before I showed up, but they were not what we would typically call developers, but they did develop a property and they had an idea that didn't fit neatly within the bounds of what we call acceptable housing, and they had to get a PD to make that happen. So I feel like it's sort of the ideas lab almost, right? It's the weird stuff like we want 0 parking on site and we just want it all be one big garden with houses in between. Weird, but if you can prove that this is sustainable or good for open space or good for portability, okay, you have met these quantitative criteria that we don't have discretion to decide if you're connected enough or useful enough to actually meet the criteria.
But that's a great idea, because I think what we ought to do is take that project and then take the latest one we just took through, you know, so they're like 20 years apart, timeline, and figure out how we can do both those 2 projects under a standard.
Yeah.
I agree too, but like Brad was saying, we haven't even imagined what these might look like, right? Like if you talk to somebody in the 80s that there's going to be a place with e-bikes, be like, I'm sorry, what? People have no clue what you're talking about. Or like, we need places to charge our cars with gas. Like people would have no clue. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years at all.
Which we need to add e-bikes to your definition of bicycles.
Sure. I'm just saying, like, it's that total unknown that I feel like at first I wasn't totally on board because I'm with you, like, let's just make the code work. But as soon as I heard it's for ideas that don't yet exist that might, that to me makes a lot more sense. And it's something that it would be wonderful to brainstorm all these right now, but we're living in 2023 and people in 2028 might think totally different than we do. And I don't think we can predict what they do or presume to.
But why put the 4 hurdles out there in front of us? Like,
Because I think we want to make it. Yeah.
I mean, why?
I think we need to have hurdles that are quantitative and completely biased towards what the community has agreed on as Plan 2040, but not biased that any one commissioner or planning commissioner can say, hey, I don't really like this guy. He's brought us some kind of crappy development proposals in the back. I'm not going to approve it. They won't say that. But England, for example, has extremely discretionary zoning and zoning appeals laws. It happens to work. But the reason people tend to like zoning laws like Germany and Japan and the US is because they're non-discretionary, or they're supposed to be non-discretionary. That's the idea. They're supposed to be non-discretionary, which means that no one more connected party than the other can get special treatment, which is ideal. So because of that, I think having something that is measurable means that you can't go back later and say, hey, you were discriminating against me because you just made up a new thing on the spot because you're being discretionary. So that's where I'm coming from.
I see what you're saying.
Like if I can prove that I have 30% of the average median income that's affordable here, that's a measure that can't be disputed if you got the data correct, right? Or like if I model the carbon emissions from this household, you can't dispute that unless you have a different model, but at least we're working with the same data, right?
So maybe a compromise would be, I mean, like you said, have some of those specific things or number 5, super majority of the commission.
Yeah, if there's something that truly, we didn't even think of this metric.
Yeah.
It's still good to have some discretion, I think, which is why our zoning code is built the way it is, right? Like, it's not fully by the book. So,
I think the other thing we want to talk about in that category while I write down what number 5 is, we want you guys to amend the code. So when we come up with new housing types, we should be amending the code to specify what that's going to be and where it's going to go and how it's going to work. This is, I hate to say it, it's not a holy document. And so we should be pulling it apart and changing it as the community changes. So that's something we'll talk about as we go forward. We're going to do the very best we can with what we know right now. And we're going to know that things will change in the future because they always change in the future. And so we want to make sure that the code is set up to account for that.
Presume that was module 3.
Module 3 will be, but we'll talk about, I mean, we're going to treat this as a living document. The city should be amending it with some regularity. I think you do some of that now, but I think it's gotten to the point where it's kind of like, it's painful to try to fix. And usually when we get to the place of a lot of PEDs, that's a symptom that the patient is kind of sick. And so we want to do a lot of what we're talking about here. We want to account for new development that we don't see, and maybe PUD is a way to do that. Maybe also amending the code is a way to do that. So let's think about both of those going forward.
it's almost like if you think of PUD as pilot unit development rather than planned unit development, if it ends up being a pilot project and it doesn't work, then it'll probably stay as PUD forever and there's no need to update the zoning code around that. But if it's a pilot and it does work, and you see maybe 2 of them, and then 3 of them, then that sounds like it would be a good sign that it's time to update the code. This pilot was a successful one.
Possibility for sure. Okay, so we got some stuff out of that. I want to make sure that we save some time at the end because Bertie's been sitting quietly and he has cool maps to show everybody. So let's get through a few more and then we actually don't have a ton. Can you pull it back up one more time, Kyle? The question is, we are recommending allowing 1 and 2 unit residential structures, single family duplex in all low density districts. We want to talk about whether or not that goes far enough. I'm sure many of you have heard that your communities across the country go forward. I think I'm going to skip that one. Yeah, we're on this one. We'll go back to that transition one at some point. Communities in the country that are saying we don't have single family zoning anymore. They still have single family development. They're not wiping that out and replacing it. And I know that you are an excellent representative of your neighborhood, but also the community as a whole. But one of the things that zoning has done poorly over the years is sort of center itself on the primacy of single family development. And that is these days expensive and not providing all the housing that the community. So one of the ways that we can allow changes in that is allow more types of either attached residential, so that could be duplex, triplex, could be townhomes, allow ADUs in more places. And I know someone in this room is thinking ADUs are not a cheap thing to build and they're not a fix to affordable housing. And I agree that affordable housing or greater density comes through lots of tools. And so we're exploring what the range of our tools could be. So if we go to Lawrence, and don't worry when I say we, I mean Brody and I, you guys don't have to take the shots on this one the first round, and we say single family is fine and it will stay where it is and the zoning will stay where it is, but someone could come in and build that top bottom duplex and that should be okay. And we could guide it through design standards. How do we think this will play out?
It's not played out well historically. I mean, we've tried what, four times to allow ADUs in slightly more dense residential districts, and I wasn't here for the first 3, but the 4th one was delayed due to COVID and never got back up. So
Now it got handed over
That's
when
good.
we started the project.
that's kind of what I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do think it's a different time though.
I sure hope so. I mean,
Yeah.
the landscape has progressed. The housing crisis has gotten worse. COVID has made things very different in terms of how we live. I'm sure hoping more people are coming on board, but I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like we're more open, but we certainly see when any mention of density in any affordable housing project, there's neighbors that are all against it. So I think some of that is just showing what this looks like, because there's a fear of the unknown. And having even some pilot not everybody.
Yeah.
But fear, fear of the unknown, of seeing that big nasty duplex of 4 bedrooms that you don't want versus something that looks just like a row house, but allows, or we see a lot of, the reality is we don't see big families anymore either, right? So the market has changed for that. And we're seeing that most of our lower income or moderate income families do not have 5 people in them anymore. So they don't need that kind of space. So we really do have to, what we thought of as a single family house, can be much smaller, right? Or different shaped, or row houses that you don't have a side yard because no one really wants to mow their yard anymore. They want to be downtown doing something fun. So I really do think we're, especially the newer generations of buyers have really changed in the last few years, in my experience. A lot of them aren't in the market because the gap is too unaffordable. But I think if we built some of those products, we would see that change. And a good example is Beatnik Court, which is the RS3, the only use of RS3. I have all those sold before we started pouring foundations. And those are subsidized, I know, but littler footprints with solar panels, very small yard, but people love them. And I think we could, do triplexes in the same kind of row house style, and people would love to buy those.
So how do you answer the question? The accessory dwelling unit in existing RS7 neighborhoods.
RS5, RS7. The R2, the new R2.
What's the question?
Well, the question is, and the people's fear is there's, 12 RS7 lots, and one person in that neighborhood decides to build an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard.
So we have the conversation.
That's where the fear,
That's the fear. Yeah.
that's
So
where
I
the
mean,
fear comes from.
is the fear that they're adding more people, or that they're adding a structure, or that it's changed?
Gonna reduce the property values in their neighborhood. It's gonna increase the traffic on the streets.
Yeah.
They don't know, you were talking before about the street visibility of this nice row of houses, and then you stand in the backyard and you look through all these backyards, and now all of a sudden you have a 950 square foot house sitting right there.
Yeah. So what I think is interesting is people react differently to that as a mother-in-law suite. If I were putting my mom in there, my neighbors may react differently than if I were making a rental out of it. What we tend to do is encourage people to look at the whole site as a bubble. I mean, I could have a family of 10 kids, and I would have that many cars and create that much traffic, and probably be even more annoying when they're all teenagers.
Or you could convert the second floor.
I could
to
do an internal ADU.
Yeah.
And when we talk to people about ADUs, everyone immediately jumps to it's a detached unit. And here probably people jump to, and students will live there. So we have a lot of assumptions likely going on in that conversation. So what we have tried to do in communities where, we have a split, where some of the community really wants to see ADUs and some really don't. We remind them that, first off, it is not cheap to build an ADU. Many people who are excited about ADUs, when you survey them about, would you do it? When would you do it? There's a lot more excitement about the idea than I would do it. And I would probably do it 10 years from now. So the numbers don't come out that way. But this is a place where we try to use the modeling also to show, and we've done in a community, here's your neighborhood. So, you could have 3 external detached ADUs, you might have, 2 more internal ADUs. This is what it would look like. It's housing conversations take a long time. And so if we want to start this conversation or carry on with where it's been, we probably want to get it out to the public in July when we start doing the rest of this.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the idea. What I don't have is tools to
Yeah.
adequately discuss.
Yeah, to make sure, I think we want to make sure that we're all having the same discussion first and foremost. And then figure out what some of the places are where people are concerned.
In defense of my neighborhood,
Absolutely.
we've accepted the most density in the city. Okay, and we've accepted it pretty well.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we've done is have existing houses subdivided. So the house that I lived in was an up-down duplex, at 1046 Ohio. We put in special abilities for existing structures that were over, I can't remember, 5,000 square feet or something. I mean, we have some big houses and we said they can do different things in our neighborhood. So I think, especially in the original town site, focusing on using existing structures, like letting people have an accessory dwelling in their garage or things like that are much more acceptable than saying, we're going to put a new structure someplace.
Absolutely.
So the garages have been used a lot for other things.
Well, and I think one of the early conversations we had with Becky and Jeff and staff was how many illegal accessory dwelling units we have in Lawrence, and what do we do to make them legal? I
Right.
mean, realistically, let's bring them on the books. Let's just get out of the way of people using those as accessory dwelling units. And in the city, the age of Lawrence, there are lots of them out there. So I think that, maybe Oriat is a great example because we do want to look at internal examples and say, it's functioning, it's fine. It'll be
But
fine.
I was gonna say, isn't that an indicator that our zoning and codes really aren't functional with the way people want the city of Lawrence to work when they all do them illegally?
Oh, well, the only part, yes.
Yeah.
We do have somebody that was raising.
I think Taylor.
In our neighborhood, they don't.
No,
They can
I'm
be
not
legal.
indicating
We have a
that
lot of-
they are there. It's
Yeah.
just, again, it's like that's
The one on
reality.
No, and these people happen 2 ways. When we start making them permissible across a number of districts, they also turn up in new construction because that's
Right.
desirable these days.
Right.
So I think.
And yeah, as you look at mother-in-law suites and things like that, to make that accessible to, the changing family structure of, this
Yeah.
generation of people that want their parents or grandparents to live with them and
Yeah.
creating that.
I want my kids.
I was gonna say father-in-law, so when I genders.
Well, yeah, either way, I built a couple of them, and they looked really great, when we were done with them. We ended up connecting them to the existing house, just like an addition. To resolve some of the neighbors, comments like what you'd indicated. It started off as a completely different structure. We brought it back onto the back of the house, and so.
I think you ought to let them build that first, though. Second.
Okay, I think Taylor had a question.
Your mother.
No, I was just applauding.
Plotting.
Okay.
You said you have pictures or something you wanted to show us?
So we're going to switch gears for a minute, and we'll pick up this conversation again at our next meeting, because this is incredibly helpful. So thank you all.
I think Philip has one more question.
I had a question. I just wanted to clarify my reading. You said that duplexes, quote unquote, were permitted in low density, are in low density housing districts. Is my reading of your table correct when it says that in R2, duplexes are only allowed by special permit? That they're not permitted by right? My reading, either I didn't see the right thing or, I just want to be clear on that.
That's the way I would.
Okay.
I think you are correct.
Okay, good. That's what I thought.
Go put I can't remember at this point if I wanted to ask you guys first or put it in the table first. But it sounds like before we release the draft, we'll put these in the table for at least duplex and the R1 and R2.
Well, I think that's a very good topic for conversation. I haven't heard it specifically. I mean, are you looking for a consensus view? I'm curious to hear it.
So you're thinking you're going to change those S's to P's.
So I'm gonna take in the use table where it says dwelling duplex and those two, the R1 and R2 are blank. I would like to put these in there and roll it out and see what the feedback is. And I will flag it for the universe so they know it's in there. We will not hide it.
I'm good with that.
I'm good.
To me, I'd be more interested in seeing R1 that was not, this, like, if you had I don't mind a second unit, but that seems more appropriate for accessory dwelling or a smaller unit than two identical
Two
units.
identical units.
Just because it really, I mean,
Change.
then you still kind of have an RS1 house. And then you have something else going on in the lot. I like that. But the idea of saying, this is RS1 and now really we've doubled the density.
So let's get that question.
Yeah.
It's a good conversation. Let's look at the map because it relates to those.
Okay.
So the other thing that we're trying to let people do, so with these districts, we want people to be able to see what does it mean. And so Bertie's going to walk us through a story map here that we'll share with the public when we're ready so people could do that. So go ahead, Bertie.
Yeah, so we've created a story map to educate the public on potential.
Let's move it up there.
Yeah, that would actually be great.
As you can do what I do, move it
Yeah,
up there. It's not going to go anywhere.
So yeah, we've created this story map to educate the public on the potential and proposed zoning changes that we're putting forward. So it starts here with a little introduction. We're anticipating that when people read this, they don't know a ton about zoning. So it's a bit of an introduction. I'll let y'all read through it for a sec. So after the introduction, we go into this slideshow. It's not quite showing up the way I want it to, but close enough. So what is zoning? And it's a brief description of zoning here with an accompanying map of what Lawrence's current zoning is. We have here a legend that goes through all of the different districts we have currently in Lawrence. Residential, commercial, industrial, everything. And as it scrolls through this map, it highlights the different kinds of districts. So here, we've isolated the residential districts. Tells you a little bit about what residential districts are like in Lawrence. And it continues through to the commercial districts. This gives you a nice layout of what zoning currently looks like within Lawrence. Industrial. Yeah, it's just very general, basic info on what zoning is Lawrence, and through this, there's perfect districts, overlay zones. And then it moves on to this comparison map. So the map is intended to explore the draft proposed adjustments to zoning districts in Lawrence is not an official zoning remap. It's meant for analysis and discussion. So following that, we have this map here, which is an interactive map showing the current zoning on the left side and our proposed zoning on the right. So from here, you can zoom into whatever parcel you want, see what your current zoning is. You see, so here we have an RS7 district. RS7 districts would be rezoned into R2. So you can use this map as an informational tool to inform yourself on what zoning is, what you can expect to see as a change. You could go here to or now, does anyone want to give an address we can look up?
334 Florida.
334, what was that?
Florida.
So you have to type on.
Oh, you're right, I can't do that. Yeah, if we go here, we'll show you that. Click on this map parcel here. Click. You're currently zoned as RM24 there, and you'll be rezoned to MU or MU4. And you can do that for any parcel within Lawrence. And it's, yeah, it's just information.
740 Rhode Island.
Seven. Yeah, yeah.
This is gonna be fun.
This is.
Just needed some zoning entertainment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, same to business RM24, you will be an MU4. And from this, you can go into the code, see what that will look like through an MU4.
So we can open up commercials?
So I think from this, you have to go, we're not linked to the draft, are we? Yeah,
This is not the draft.
okay.
But
We're not quite that
Yeah.
technological.
Oh, no, but I meant.
And following that, we have a conversion table that gives a higher level view of what zoning converts to. Following this table, we have a link for some public input, let us know what they think. It's not a survey, but public comment. And a link to
That was raised on.
the project email where they can send any personal comments. Yeah,
That's very cool.
it's informational link to
Yeah.
Thanks.
Forward to it.
any input on things you'd like to see in this page, any changes, things that the public would be receptive to.
I think, so go back, the two charts side by side, that's the old and this is the new.
There you go. Current is on this side.
So it is on the
Proposed, which could be clarified.
Just watch the.
I was hoping the right side would be less color.
There is some changes I think to be made because there is a consolidation of zoning districts. Fewer, I think we can change that, make it more readable.
Oh, that's.
That is a large, this side of the map, there's a lot going on. It's hard to read. Sorry.
I guess I was inferring that there'd just be a lot less zoning districts.
Oh, yeah. There are some things, I think this is aligned a little bit, now that I'm looking at it, but.
What we want to do is, for people who feel like they want to know what's going on with the conversions and the mapping, because most people's relationship to a code update is what's happening on my property.
Yes, no, I can appreciate that.
We
Yeah.
want them to be able to see, we want to start this conversation really early because we find that as we do this, and Lawrence may be the exception to our rule, but usually, a handful of people come in and say, hey, that's not my actual zoning. And what you're converting me to isn't right either. And so that's an opportunity to start having those discussions. But this is kind of an entryway into more mapping, looking at Lawrence. We think after we roll this out, we're next working on a density map. And we want to start looking at what those densities are and what would it look like to increase those densities in some way. We're also taking a look at neighborhoods across the city, what the existing density is, so we can help ground people like, hey, I know you sound completely afraid of 24 units an acre, but guess what? It exists right here and you're totally fine with it there.
Are you gonna do density of dwelling units or density of people?
Well,
It could be both.
Okay, good.
And that discussion we had earlier about the vast amount of different building types, different densities, that will be shown. in the density map. You
okay.
might have a top-down duplex, you might have a side-to-side duplex, you might have a multi-unit of 24 to 32 units. And that will be shown within the density map as comparison. Like if you're moving from one of these lower residentials to this is what you could possibly see.
Is there available data to do person density as well? Because I think when a lot of people think density, they think like crowded tenements in the Lower East Side or Hong Kong, where there's truly a lot of people in one dwelling unit. Whereas density of dwelling units is like, there's a lot of maybe 2-bedroom apartments, a lot of 1-bedroom apartments with just one person in each of them. And, compared to a 10-person family in a house, like it's actually maybe lower density of people in some cases. It just sounds scarier.
Yeah, just how they interpret the word.
Yep. In the worst way possible.
I have
Yeah.
one more question. Respected mapping. When do you anticipate that you will have the street widths associated with this? If that's going to play into parking concerns, requirements for off-street parking in established neighborhoods. Right now, based on my reading of what you produced, that you have a street width criterion in there. So when are you going to roll that into this piece so that people can understand the connection between potential parking issues and changes in housing form.
So we do parking in our second module, so that'll be the next chunk of drafting that comes out. In, I believe, late August, early September. We don't do street widths in the zoning code.
In subdivision standards, they are.
Okay, so we don't change existing street widths in the zoning code.
You reference street widths in the ADU specs.
Okay, so the ADU specs are probably carried forward from the current regulation. So that is something that we can talk about. So,
I didn't like.
but the rest of the full-on design piece, that will be coming in the next chunk of drafting.
Okay.
Okay, so we're at 5:01 and
6:01.
2 hours is completely inadequate to have these discussions, but we've got more coming. I'm gonna look to our chairperson. Do you want anything else to happen? Do you want anything else to happen before we go public? Do you want to let the public start chewing on it? And we come back as a group and keep going. It's draft until the end, right? And then it gets adopted and then it can be changed again the next day. So.
I mean, I guess. Not just me, I'm open to this. I mean, yeah. I would rather, I think some of the things we've talked about, I mean, I'd rather see some. Like, for example, provocative sort of things to get people's attention. To get what the feedback is. I mean, and we're gonna come back and hear that feedback. I think the natural reaction is, I mean, some of the things I think we said here today pushes you a little, I mean, I don't know, a little farther
It does.
than you were there. I'd rather see that go out to the public and see if, you know, some neighborhoods come back and say, that's never going to work.
Okay.
Whereas opposed if they see something like, oh, my neighborhood's not changing, I'm not gonna say anything. I mean, I'd rather see a little bit of that. That's my opinion. I'd rather push that and then see what we get, and then we can come back and talk about it. And then I think other people are gonna say, I'm okay with that until I see the parking standard. And then when I see the parking standard, then all of a sudden, you know, now I'm gonna be interested. So I still think some people look at this and go, that's okay, as long as there's a parking standard. And then when we pile it up, I mean, I think we're always gonna be coming back talking about module 1. When someone sees module 2 and how it interacts with module 1, they might have an opinion that they didn't have the first time. Or vice versa. So
Yeah.
again, I think that also has to be the message, which is, this is a process.
Yeah.
And eventually the whole thing's gonna be adopted, but you know, let's be part of, that's my thought. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Marcy?
Well, my question was, what are all the sections you're going to include? And then I have some really quick comments that I'd just like to make generally. I mean, are you talking about putting P2 open space in what you, and then I think you really do need to indicate that there's a maximum coverage. And I'd love to see wetlands and wilderness in there along with recreational space. When you talk about open space, but it says open space and recreational areas. So if you added wetlands and wilderness, I mean, you can add those or not, but otherwise it seems very limiting. On urban reserve, principal uses, it says the only principal uses are ones that are in existing prior to annexation. And then it says the development or expansion of any structure shall comply with dimensional standards of the R1 district. To me, those are in conflict. Either you let somebody build or you don't let somebody build. So you could see what you meant to do with that.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 66.
And so the urban reserve, I think we carried forward. We, the consultant team, flagged it. I think we may have talked about it as a group at some point in time, and it's the holding zone for
Right.
annexation essentially. So the conversation, and maybe we save this for our July meeting, but you know, the conversation that we started to put forward is don't do urban reserve, zone it to what you want it to develop as.
Okay. That's fine, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
there's a conflict between the wording in that. And then the only one other thing is in agriculture, use specific standards. I like the way that you divide them, between structures, maintenance, excluded animals, but you do that really just for small animals and not for like fowl. And you could do the same thing. You could make those much more consistent in the way they're. And does anybody object if I give the team some ideas?
Go for it.
Make those more consistent. All right. Because it just keeps me entertained.
Yes.
As long as you're not talking about bees.
I'm talking,
Oh.
no, Africanized honeybees are prohibited. But I think the coop is really a structure. And so say, these are the structures in this thing. And I think you want to make it easier to read, and that to me would make it easier to read. And then I have one, I'll just give you. Have a would be to is. All right, thank you.
Email it to Becky or Jeff and they'll forward it on.
Okay.
At 6:00, little after 6, other overarching comments? We've got lots of time to talk about this, but let's get it out there.
It's about the general process. So I interpreted our role to like truly read the whole thing and like technically pick it apart. So I got like 11 pages of notes and a lot of sort of discussion questions and comments and like, why is this here? Doesn't make any sense. Is this hurting anybody? And how do we do those? Is that going to be at the next meeting? Because I feel like a lot of them, if answered, could really shine light on what we really intend to do. Like just as a totally random example, there is a truck stop use allowed in downtown. Why? It seems kind of silly, right? So I mean, just like tiny things all through the 200 pages that I generally think it's a wonderful
Are
document.
you comfortable just having your notes mailed out to the group so we can see what you flagged?
I assumed that was going to happen. So according to some communication I saw, it's like, hey, submit your notes to the planning team and they'll distribute for discussion before the discussion. It's like, all right, whatever, sounds good. But I don't know what happened overall. So I did send in a lot of notes, but I don't know what the process is now. So.
Well, you've come to the right place. If you're comfortable with them being distributed,
Talk about that.
Yeah, no. We wanted, so a couple things happen with steering committees. We need your input. We don't want to impose on you to do that level of review. If you have done that level of review and you want to send it to Becky or Jeff, probably the thing to do, if the committee likes, is to circulate it to everybody. If there are just straight up edits, we'll pick those up on our end. The rest of it, we can roll into conversation with.
What about the format that was done for the code assessment where people who wanted to could go through and add comments tagged on individual sections and then there could be replies that I don't think that functionality usually works.
Our thought is to post it that way for public comments.
Okay.
Part of the conversation we had was it's can be challenging with open meetings to do a strictly steering committee review version of it, if I am understanding that correctly. So why don't we talk to the city attorney's office? Because it would be nice to have that shared version among the group. I don't know that we can do that without sharing it with the public, though.
I see. Okay.
So that's where we got jammed up on that. Our first idea was to let you guys do it that way and then share that back out, but that's how we're back to written comments like that.
And if I understand big picture, the idea was supposed to get some of these ideas out there, go to public comment.
Yeah.
Hear what the public has to say, then bring it back to us again.
Yes.
On the 20th of July. Give more feedback, but again, still understanding as we continue to move on to module 2 and 3. To continue to have feedback. And so again, I think there's a mixture here, I think some of the things you pulled forward, like you probably didn't think about using that example, truck stopping downtown.
Right.
No one's analyzed that. It was in the current code, you stuck it in there. But that's not, again, probably a good thing we want to take out at some point. So I think sharing that and bringing those forward are helpful. So I think sending them to Becky and Jeff and then forwarding on is probably the best way for some of those detailed ones.
I think the trick is though, a lot of them aren't like, this is factually wrong, you should fix it. A lot of them are like, I'm not sure this is really something that we as a community one, but I want to post it to a group and see if I'm on the right page or not, right? Like, for example, bus terminals aren't allowed in downtown. We're gonna build one. We probably should allow it in downtown, right? Like, there are certain things that, you know, as somebody in the transportation sphere, I'm kind of aware of that, you know, maybe we should put that in there, but I'm not gonna unilaterally say like, you must do it, so.
Can that be just the start to the public comments? I mean, I think it would be very helpful for everybody.
You mean
I mean,
the public.
To say, here are 11 pages of notes. And then I think it's going to be really important to let the public know that this is a process.
I mean, you
So
can
don't-
post as a public comment.
Yeah,
Yeah, just
that's fine.
make it a public comment and because I'd like to see it and I think the public would like to see it. And if it is just a question, that's fine.
Yeah, one of the things we think we need to do in Lawrence in particular is post public comments so everyone else can see it.
Mhm.
So we could do that with group members also.
Yeah, like the system you did for the first one for the code system, that seems like it would make sense, you know.
We will do
Yeah.
it for when we're ready to post the full draft. So when we will make some tweaks here, we will push it forward, push it further, because that's the conversation we're having. And we'll post that. And you guys can weigh in on that one. Everyone can,
Yeah.
except for you. And you can too. So we will do it that way on each of the drafts when the steering committee decides it's ready to go to the public.
But mine are just going to be, mine are really edits, not changes. I mean, mine is just,
If any foul edits, we'll just put it in. Word. That makes sense.
Real quick, the ADU code was not looked at, has not been updated.
Has not been updated yet. So
So that will go out,
it will go out,
but
flag it and say,
yeah. I
do
mean,
we want to do where Brad is, do we want to make that a little more forward thinking at this point? Okay. Okay.
definitely flagged.
Are you guys? good?
definitely flagged.
That we'll keep flagged. Florence, is that going to be what happens?
They'll protect you.
Okay.
No, I honestly think we'll have a different reaction this time, but maybe I'm optimistic.
So
I'm loving the
when you send out the drafts to the public, I really feel like that you need to put some cool pictures in. I mean, big on pictures because we can look at these little diagrams and clearly we talked about how they are maybe not representative of all the different uses. I think it's important for people to have visual views so that they are not like thinking of a little shack someplace, you know, that they're thinking of something cool looking. I mean, there's tons of pictures that.
I agree with you. We could add some,
Could you do like an addendum, like
Yeah.
instead of it being in the code, like add 3 or 4 pages for each building zoning area that say, hey, these are potential options of what a building could look like, but not actually incorporate all those in
Right. It didn't have to be.
in the code, just like an addendum,
yeah, I think.
exhibit or something.
For public comment, what we can do is add it in as comment. And I know you guys can't see what's in my head. We can add it in and say this isn't regulatory. This is to help everyone picture what we're doing here. We would need to have a discussion as a group later about whether or not those pictures stay in because we find that people read them super literally. And
They go, it's gotta look
Why
like that.
I want it to look like that. And then you're like, well, it doesn't actually have.
Right.
So we can do it for this round. We'll talk about it again for whether it stays in or not. Good. Okay. Okay, so our plan was to try to post this in a few weeks because we will be back with you guys in mid-July, late July, and we wanted to do some outreach on this at the same time. So what I think might work is if you make our changes from this draft to the next draft in red line or in track changes and share that with the whole group and then just ask for a survey of, are you okay with it going out like this? Knowing that we're still in discussion about all of it, and if anyone has complete heart failure about something, you'll scream, stop the presses and let us know.
I may have heard wrong, but Brad, it sounded like you were leaning towards just, it's good enough. let's just,
Well, I
Get it out.
think make a few, no, but I think we want to make a few more
We're gonna push the envelope a little bit on
Yeah.
this stuff.
from what we saw today
okay,
for what goes out.
Yeah.
Again, I think what you want to say is these are, drafts. I mean, you've done that, some of that, drafts and ideas. Let's hear your feedback on that.
Yeah, I think I'm asking, does the group want to see it again, or should we push it a little further, put it out, and then we'll come back and talk about it? What's the preference?
I'm okay with you.
We're fine, or I'm.
I'm okay with you changing it and pushing it out.
Okay.
Again, no one's asking the public to say this is the final. This
Yep,
is,
that-
we want your feedback on this.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yep.
So
Pay attention to what we're up to here.
I think if you make a few of these changes, push it out. And then let's see what the feedback is, and then we'll be able to also see that as whatever you push out. And again, come back and make comments. And if we don't have enough time on July 20th, again, we'll keep going.
Just want to say thanks. Thanks. I never know how this conversation is going to go. And it's exciting to actually say this wasn't enough. So, and to help start narrowing down some of our caveats, some of our, it's not going to fly here. So this is all where we want to go. It's all good input, and I'm glad that everyone felt comfortable saying something. I am not going to lose sleep over you not liking the graphics tonight. It's okay. Just to share it with you and have you say, wow, that wasn't even close. So we got it. We'll go make changes to it. Thank you.
I think overall, though, I liked the way it read, and I did appreciate more graphics. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm aware as as a builder, as you do tend to pigeonhole people when you look at a picture of a building, but I appreciated that.
That's great.
And even as a lawyer, I appreciated the plain reading of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
it's really good.
I like that.
Considering it was code, it was reasonably easy to follow.
okay.
Excellent.
And I just want to make it clear too, I feel like I may be one of the more critical people here, but even with 11 pages of comments, I would be totally fine with publishing this thing like as it is. I think it's really a huge improvement already. I just want to make it like awesome and perfect, right? Like it's pretty darn good right now.
Good.
I can't find a ton of fault nitpicks.
Okay, we're off to a good start then. We will reach despair at some point, I swear, but.
We will reach.
Okay, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone online. Appreciate it.
Becca asked, she said, so there.
Otherwise, I